You would think the National Cup of a country with as rich a footballing history as Italy would be a thing of magic. And whilst the Coppa Italia has certainly sprung up special moments, it really isn't what it should be, and is something in desperate need of reform. To put it into context, it is important to compare the Coppa Italia and the best domestic cup competition in the world, the FA Cup. The FA Cup is renowned for its acclaimed magic, seeing non-league teams coming up against footballing giants, the joy of a cup run, and the final, while the biggest days of the footballing calendar. The competition tends to have well over 700 teams competing throughout the season. By way of contrast, the Coppa Italia recently had the competition reduced to 40 teams, and only clubs in Serie A, Serie B, and 4 clubs from Serie C will be able to compete. A huge number of teams who could grow from the competition will no longer take part. One thing that makes the FA Cup special is the David versus Goliath element. In 2021, 8th tier Marine hosted Tottenham in the FA Cup, and the match, broadcast on live TV, helped Marine pocket well over £100,000, enough to secure the future of the club for many, many years. A David versus Goliath encounter in the Coppa Italia, as it stands, may at the very best be the equivalent of Coventry taking on Manchester City. But the reason the matchups work so well in the FA Cup is that it is quite possible that Bishop's Cleeve could go on an incredible run that sees them take on Arsenal at home, bringing in a bonanza, and they have 90 minutes where they could shock the world and cause an upset. The format of the Coppa Italia does not allow this though. The FA Cup draw is unbiased, unseeded, and completely random, meaning anyone can take on anyone. The Coppa Italia, meanwhile, is completely set up to allow the teams at the top to succeed. The opening rounds see the teams from outside the top flight come up against the 12 teams below 8th in Serie A. By the time the rest of the Serie A teams come in, there are only 16 sides left. Many of the underdogs have already eaten each other by the time the top sides have entered, and any matchups that do take place are hardly accessible. Many games are played at 3 o'clock during working days, making it increasingly difficult for fans to attend or even watch on television. If there is a mismatch, the rules stipulate that the higher position team must be the host. This means there are never stories like Jose Mourinho's Tottenham playing at Marine's ground, and instead, the Coppa Italia fixtures are played in vastly empty stadiums. The tournament is set up in this way to seemingly protect the big teams, in an attempt to get as much TV money as possible. But the excitement that is produced by a semi-professional side taking on a giant has been vastly underestimated. There have been debates as to how much the FA Cup still means, but it is clear that special moments remain and will continue to happen. Meanwhile, there is a sense of general disinterest in the Coppa Italia, and it has been treated as an irritant by many. Viewership of the Coppa Italia final has increased in recent times, mainly down to making the final a one-legged affair, a step in the right direction, but there is still much to do in fixing the competition. The 2022 Coppa Italia final between Inter Milan and Juventus was a thrilling affair, showing that there is certainly potential that can be seized upon. Italian football is steeped in history, but the Coppa Italia is rarely something that enters the conversation when talking about great teams. None of Herrera's Inter or Arrigo Sacchi and Fabio Capello's Milan sides won the Coppa Italia, with their eyes set on bigger prizes. The fact they didn't win it is not something enshrined in tragedy, like Brian Clough and Bob Paisley failing to win the FA Cup. And despite being one of the most successful teams of all time, AC Milan have only won 5 Coppa Italias, and have only won a solitary title since the 1970s, and even that was nearly 20 years ago. Having such few victories suggests that the tournament has never really been one of their priorities. Another of the key issues of the Coppa Italia is its history, or lack thereof. The first Coppa Italia was held in 1922, and the next edition did not take place until 4 years later, and it ended up being cancelled during the round of 32. The third edition didn't even take place until 1936. After World War II, the tournament was put on hiatus between 1943 and 1958. During this hiatus, 11 different teams won the FA Cup. That's 11 different stories to pass on through the generations, whilst the Coppa Italia finally got the ball rolling in 1958, decades behind other countries. The lack of history has had a huge impact on the Cup, as it missed out on many years' worth of great tales and memorable finals. It takes time to fall in love with a competition, and by losing around 2 decades worth of history, the Coppa Italia has fallen way behind. The question is simple: how do we fix the Coppa Italia? And the answer is simple: follow the FA Cup. Now, Italian football does not have the same level of non-league as English football, but that doesn't mean they can't find participants. The Italian league is divided into 9 levels, with regional divisions from the 3rd tier downwards. This can provide a bigger series of early rounds before the top flight sides come in, putting good prize money on the table and giving the lower league clubs an incentive. They can put out their best teams in an attempt to win money that might see them build a new stand or clubhouse or sign a player that will get them promotion. And knowing that soon a tie against someone like Juventus or Napoli awaits, it will make the competition something special. Helping non-league clubs grow will encourage local participation and help the footballing economy across the country grow, rather than all the eggs being put in the Serie A basket. Instead of having the Serie A teams come in when most of the lower league teams are out, allow them to come in at one of the early rounds, just like the FA Cup, so that there can be unlikely clashes, as well as more opportunities for lower league clubs to cause an upset, and more opportunities for the top flight clubs to give chances to their youngsters. Runs in the lower league are incredibly rare. Alessandria of Serie C made it to semi-final in 2016, and Pordenone got to the quarter-finals in 2017, narrowly missing out on penalties. However, these are the exception rather than the rule, and there are far more great cup run stories from the FA Cup. A non-seeded, random draw could see many more great cup runs and giant killings happen in the Coppa Italia. I am far from the only one calling for reform. Many have expressed their issues with the Coppa Italia for years, and you have to feel something eventually must break. Italian football is special, but its domestic cup is far behind the FA Cup, Coppa del Rey and DFB Pokal. Reform is needed if they want to have their own special cup final day, but the longer those in charge ignore the need for reform, the more damage will be done to a competition that has not yet met its potential.